This country copied everything from America: the Constitution, the flag, the president, the Senate, the Supreme Court, all of it. And it worked for a while. This became Africa's first republic, 1847, before Germany was a country, before Italy existed. Then it fell apart. 2 civil wars, 250,000 people dead. The economy gone. GDP down 95%. When I started looking into what's happening there right now, I expected the usual story. Another failed state, another broken country, but that's not what I found. What I found was confusing. In 2025, the president refused to enforce a Supreme Court ruling. In March 2026, soldiers from Guinea crossed the border and replaced the Liberian flag with their own. In April, the central bank said it would print $79 billion in new banknotes. Same month, a congressman got expelled, and 3 people said their signatures were forged. That sounds like a country falling apart. But hold on. A president ignoring a court ruling? America's been fighting about that for 2 years. Printing money? Liberia's inflation is 7%. Turkey's is 31%. Venezuela? Don't even a congressman expelled under shady procedure? The next day, an independent newspaper ran a full editorial calling it the weaponization of procedure. In Turkey, that journalist would be in prison right now. And that Supreme Court ruling, the court made it anyway. The former president spoke out against it. The West African regional body stepped in. Lawmakers started defecting. The pressure worked. This doesn't sound like collapse. This sounds like democracy. Grinding, ugly, loud, but functioning. Okay, so here's where it gets weird. There's an organization called Freedom House. Every year, they score every country on Earth. Political rights, civil liberties, the basics. Liberia scores 64 out of 100. Partly free. Now look at the countries we think of as successful. Saudi Arabia, 8. UAE, 18. Egypt, 18. Turkey, 33. Iran, 11. Turkmenistan, 1. Qatar's GDP per capita is $80,000. Liberia's is $800. That's 100 to 1. But Liberia is more than twice as free. 2 peaceful transfers of power in 7 years. Saudi Arabia has never had one. Ever. Liberia's Supreme Court ruled against its own president, and the ruling held. In Turkey, the president fired 3 central bank governors in 2 years for disagreeing with him. And in 2026, Liberia got elected to the UN Security Council. First time in its history. A country that was at war many years ago now has a seat where global security gets decided. So I kept digging, because I wanted to know, is this just about freedom? Is this a free country that can't feed itself? It's not. Liberia has no oil, no gas, no sovereign wealth fund, no tech industry. For decades, every analysis started the same way, lacking natural resources, but today, around 80% of Liberia's GDP goes directly to households. This is a country that used to be run by 5% of its population. The wealth went to a tiny elite. Everyone else got nothing. Now, 80% flows to ordinary people. In Saudi Arabia, that number is 45%. Kuwait, 33%. Qatar, barely 20%. And here's the part that really got me. Liberia grew 5.1% last year. The IMF expects over 5% again this year. Inflation coming down, fiscal targets beaten. Saudi Arabia, 3%. Qatar, 2.4%. Kuwait, 1.9%. This country has no oil, and it's outgrowing the petrostates. Then it gets worse for them. In early 2026, the Iran war shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Ship traffic dropped 95%. The World Bank cut the entire Middle East's growth forecast in half. Oil wealth is also oil dependence. When the strait closes, the money stops. Liberia doesn't have that problem, never had oil to lose. But make no mistake, poverty in Liberia is still widespread, but the line is moving right direction and faster than most of the oil-rich world right now. So how did this start? In 1822, a group in America started sending freed slaves to West Africa. The idea was, give them their own country. By 1847, they had one. They wrote a constitution, modeled it on America's, designed a flag, red and white stripes, single white star, blue field. Look at it next to the American flag. It's not subtle. They built the whole thing. President, Senate, House of Representatives, Supreme Court, the full package. On paper, a democracy. In practice, not even close. The people who built this country, the Americo-Liberians, descendants of freed American slaves, were maybe 3 to 5% of the population. The other 95%, the indigenous people who'd been living there for centuries, couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, weren't even considered citizens until 1904. One party held power for 133 years straight. Elections happened. The Constitution existed, but none of it was real. The whole system ran for a tiny elite. Everyone else was locked out. Tocqueville said it 200 years ago. Laws mean nothing without the habits to support them. Liberia had the laws and didn't have the habits, not for 133 years. In 1980, it all broke. A military sergeant named Samuel Doe led a coup. The president was killed. The elite families that had run the country for over a century gone in a single night. And what came next? I mean, if you know anything about this part of the world, you know the pattern. A strong man takes over, ethnic violence, a rebellion, then another one, and 14 years of war. By 2003, 250,000 people were dead. A third of the country had fled. GDP down 95%. Courts, schools, civil service, all gone. If any country on earth should have stayed broken, it was Liberia in 2003. But it didn't stay broken. In 2005, Liberians elected Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, first woman to lead any country in Africa ever. She walked into a job with almost nothing. No electricity, no running water in most places, no courts, a population that had just lived through 14 years of war. She served 2 terms, and then in 2017, this is the part that got me, she handed power to George Weah, a former football star, political outsider. Completely different party. No coup, no crisis, just an election and a handover. Then it happened again. 2023, Weah lost. He conceded. Power transferred peacefully. Again, 2 peaceful handovers in 7 years, in a country that 20 years earlier was in the middle of a civil war. And then in 2026, Liberia got elected to the UN Security Council, first time in 178 years of existence. A country the world had written off was now sitting at the table where global security gets decided. The institutions that had been hollow for over a century, destroyed in 14 years of war, had been rebuilt. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to work. So, remember that Supreme Court ruling? Here's the full story. In late 2024, a group of lawmakers tried to kick out the Speaker of the House. Problem is, they didn't have enough votes. The Constitution says you need 2/3. They didn't have it, so they just did it anyway. Held their own sessions, passed budgets, made decisions, acted like they were in charge. The Supreme Court said no, twice. Everything you did is unconstitutional, null and void. And the president, he basically said, I don't care what the court says. I'll work with whoever shows up. Now, in Turkey or Egypt, that's the end of the story. The president wins. Court gets ignored. Everyone moves on. But in Liberia, something happened that I genuinely did not expect. The former president, the guy who lost to Boakai, went public and said this threatens the foundation of the nation. The West African regional body flew in and demanded the rule of law be respected. Lawmakers started switching sides. Newspapers ran editorials calling it a constitutional crisis, and the pressure worked. The speaker stepped down on his own terms. A new one was elected. Through the process, by the book. That's what breaks look like. Not clean, not pretty, not fast, but real. So look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Liberia figured it out. It hasn't. Freedom House gives it perfect scores on free elections and opposition competitiveness. A 3 out of 4 on freedom of expression. That's real. But judicial independence? 1 out of 4. Anti-corruption? 1 out of 4. Violence against women is still severe. Poverty is everywhere. The War Crimes Court, promised for 20 years, still hasn't opened. Liberia's democracy is fragile, no question. But, and this is the part I keep coming back to, this country went through everything. Over a century of fake democracy. 2 civil wars, lost 95% of its economy. lost 250,000 people, lost its courts, its schools, its entire civil service, and it came back with a court system that tells the president no, a press that writes what it wants, an opposition that actually wins, and a government that actually leaves. The institutions didn't make Liberia poor, the wars did. A century of shutting people out did. The institutions are what's bringing it back. When Liberia held its first real election in 2005, there was almost nothing left. The economy was destroyed. The country was destroyed. That was 20 years ago. Since then, 2 peaceful transfers of power. GDP per capita up 5-fold. Growing faster than Saudi Arabia, faster than Qatar, faster than Kuwait. With no oil, no gas, no sovereign wealth fund, nothing in the ground. A country that was once run by 5% of its people now has an economy where everyone counts. Its Supreme Court just ruled against its own president, and the ruling held. Its newspapers call the government unconstitutional, and the journalists go home that night. Not to prison, home. None of this was supposed to happen. Not here, not in a country this poor, this broken, this scarred. For over a century, Liberia had democracy on paper. It didn't work. Paper is not enough. It was never going to be enough. But when the real thing showed up, when courts started pushing back, when elections started meaning something, when the press got free, when power actually changed hands, it worked. And so far, it's holding.
Liberia saved the world. It saved the hope that democracy can take root anywhere on this planet, even in the middle of nowhere. That's the session. If this landed with you, please like and subscribe to support my mission. Meeting adjourned.